Hi, this is Theo, and I wanted to make a talking kind of video about certain things, just project a bit out on the channel. Considering I just watched the new movie Beau is Afraid, which came out today or yesterday technically, and I really wanted to put my thoughts out there because the movie really spoke to me emotionally, and I felt like there was a lot of things very correlating about it that I really felt like I could piece together just talking about it, having my thoughts go wild. So I'm just making this video to see how I feel about it or how people feel about this kind of video. So I would like to start off kind of with the premise of the main character, Beau. Obviously, this video has a lot of spoilers, and it's gonna really talk and correlate with how my interactions with my life are correlated to the movie, how I perceive the movie going by. So this is really just like a formulaic opinion sort of pieced together and then trying to put out like sort of ideas to pass around. But if you haven't seen the movie, definitely give that a watch. But it's definitely not a film that anyone can just digest. It's a very, very narrow-minded kind of storytelling of one kind of individual that can seem bland or pale in comparison to what other movies' main characters can be. But highly recommended if you're willing to kind of see the symbols throughout the movie, especially with the main character. Now, the idea behind Beau as a character is that he is a mama's boy, basically. Like, it's straight to the get-go that he does everything and will do anything for his mom. But the issue, like the way the movie portrays it, that most people gloss over, is the sort of the controlling situation he's been put in over the years, with how the mom is kind of submissive, or not submissive, but like agitated with the character's choices, that they won't be able to see them when it's the dad's death's anniversary, and how it like pretty much in a sense the mom takes sort of a more selfish role than the child. But the idea is that Beau has a dynamic and is projected from that mother point of view, that he is actually the selfish one and he's holding on to all the guilt, which ultimately creates a very, very passive character that always is looking for a choice from people, like what he will be willing to do with how people perceive it. And that's the whole point of the movie, is that Beau is like always throughout the movie has this sense of judgment wherever he goes, or things he has to look out for. In the first scenes, he has to worry about like all these kind of people, and this is not really his psyche, but this is like Ari kind of personifying what Beau's world looks like to him, or how he feels how certain people are in the world. And we can kind of see there's like a connection with how the rich are kind of like this very happy, very controlling environment that are very twisted. But then we see kind of like the normal streets, everyone's very chaotic, but they're so like, it's so irregular. It's like kind of in a sense there's like a pattern you can avoid. There's reasons why like Joaquin kind of like thinks he's outsmarting the public when he puts the book, when he's opening the door to the apartment complex, he puts a book so that he'll be able to come back fast in time, but he's too slow. And so that's it could be a stretch, but that may be his perception on how he sees the population or sees the people around him in the city. To further that note, I like the city's viewpoint or how the city is viewed kind of gives like a BioShock kind of feel, or like a pandemic of zombie individuals, because every one of them kind of like has low IQ moments. We have comedic scenes with like the cop or even the homeless man stabbing Beau, that you really dive deep. Oh, even the his apartment complex manager, or however you say it, they all just kind of like don't interact with Beau or kind of close him off, and we don't really see that because Beau is that kind of person to avoid, but it's all because everyone has their own selfish tales or journeys to them, that it's like not worth troubling. Even like the UPS guy who finds out Beau's mom's dead, is more pertained about getting out of that situation he's dealing with, because he doesn't, in a sense, the audience and everyone around him doesn't want to deal with this crybaby character that is always perceived, which always has a darker narrative and darker sense of humor, which is why people think it's a humor, but realistically this is kind of a therapeutic sort of character development shown on a big screen, basically. To further that point, this is Beau's adventure through his trauma. It's him trying to change through the trauma that's given to him. And realistically, when you're dealt with a hand of trauma like that, you need to have support or your own sense of judgment. Otherwise, you become warped into a false sense of reality, which is kind of what happens 2 times in the movie when he's in the village, which ultimately prove that that sense of solitude doesn't really prove to give him a brighter future or end, which ultimately I wish Beau had more of a hopeful story to that, just because it was very heart-wrenching to see a story that he perceived as his future to be fully his end at when he came back to the show. And it really did showcase like how age can make us. I think that scene altogether is so beautiful because it really paints a picture that age really does bring the happiness into us. I think there was always a time when all of us have been in our lowest points, but we've all aged, lived, and we've found sort of the joy into it. And I do really love the fact that in that story that there was a sense of joy, that there was, hopefulness. But it was all kind of erased as soon as Beau, portrayed a situation that can just happen, that could be really related to his unresolved trauma that he felt, that he never really diagnosed until he came to the mom's house. And so there's a lot to talk about with that, and with the fact of the present, how he threw that away, which is a very confusing point I'd like to talk about later. And I really wanted to talk about the family archetype because it's one of the most chilling feelings. What was interesting is that they were very controlling because of the trauma they have had of losing their son. They don't want to kind of repeat that. It also begs the question, has this happened with a different individual? Because, why would anyone make a tracking device onto someone's foot after you do surgery on them? It begs the question, what do these characters hide behind? It's kind of like gives an get out kind of perception of characters, where are these people, more deceptive or more sinister than they appear to be? And realistically, we don't really see that, because the only instance that ever kind of outlines is when the daughter is in view, because it's sort of a hate family dynamic where one of the family members just is neglected of love, and the parents are kind of in this, which is interesting because it doesn't look like the dad or the mom really even hate each other, which is always confusing dynamic to me. Because usually with that kind of dynamic or storytelling or situation, it always perceives to me that when someone goes through something traumatic, especially with my case as well, that individual becomes unstable and doesn't correlate decision making or ideas or habits or cares or enjoyment into a very healthy manner, and so they can perceive almost anyone as their own enemy, which is what was very confusing in a sense with the mom. Maybe she had a very close attachment to Beau, because in a lot of the scenes, even the last one before her daughter died, she was very closely affectionate to Beau and the dad. The dad, it was not really like they weren't very lovey-dovey, which is to be expected with a married couple who are in their 40s. That point is, very judgmental, but it's supposed to be, because to me, I lived in a family where that dynamic is just kind of common, that people make shitty decisions as married couples, so it kind of like threw me on a whim that the family just didn't kind of self-destruct itself. It was really only the daughter. It makes me wonder if there was like a religious tie to it all, like if they were just completely Christian. It's kind of confusing too, because the dad is also the surgeon, so there's the sense of science and healing, but ultimately the only thing that the main thing that was confusing, why I even put that point up to those scenes, was how closely attached they were to the deceased son and how Beau replaced him. It really showed the mental state of that family was unhealthy on the mom's side. The dad's side, it was realistically kind of like, I have busy stuff to do, and you can, be the guy to hang out in this family. He didn't really perceive Beau as his own son, but it was really like the mom who at the end of the scene started kissing his forehead and really going oh, you can stay however long you need to heal and stuff. But to move past the parents, I did kind of want to talk about the daughter, just because the daughter had a very warped perception of how, and it was very curious to me how or why people have this sort of selfish sort of perspective. It really kind of reminded me of my interactions with my brother and how extreme individuals of that age take it. They will literally kill themselves, or they'll try to take the situation into their own hands, try to control it. And that's kind of what was happening later on, as Beau was kind of overstepping his boundaries, being into the family for way too long because of the parents. And that really caused a lot of distress onto the daughter's side. I think the only other scene to tie back with thoughts from the time he was spending healing at the family's house is two scenes in particular, which were the scene where he's forced to go on a ride with the daughter, and she, with her friend, offers him a joint, and Beau takes a hit, which, I think it's, that scene alone is just a very, it really painted, a very personal picture to me, that, there's always this fear when taking, substances that, are to make you happy, or to because that was the perception the daughter had, is that, she even says in the in the movie, they'll give you this pill and then they'll want you to do this to make you feel happy or something, which is very interesting point of view that the movie, always focuses on medication. And medication, in certain instances, can be very, very damaging in terms of anxiety or depression or to one's mental health, because it can have a perception that you have to use this or that it's making you like this, and so you have to deal with that. Truthfully, I had medication for my ADHD, and when I was taking the medication, it really did point a perspective that I am this drone to my own body, and that I would never really have interactions that were controlled by the consciousness of me. And it really did pull me apart when I was going through middle school, when I was also dealing with a lot of stuff on my own at that time. And it really paints a perspective, because what we look at into this movie as well with Beau is realistically, where can anything be real for him? All this anxiety he feels, is that even real? Because in the film, even the mom, she even points out, like, Beau, you shouldn't be afraid of anything, because all you're doing is complaining. To elaborate this point, and to even kind of correlate and explain or deep dive into this, it's kind of like the mom puts out everything for her son, and all she gets, even quoted in from the movie, empty promises from him. And the idea here is that the mom is just completely and utterly controlling her son's future, and while she sees nothing for him, he is trying to piece it together with people, because that's the dynamic Beau's character is. He is built and growed upon with the individuals he's dealt with or associates with. And that's kind of why this character becomes such a boo-hoo character that never grows or does anything within the whole movie besides dying in the end, kind of trying to hopefully figure out his sins that never are repented for, as the middle of the village scene states. And I feel like that's a really important point to individuals like that you always, through trials, through errors, through misery, you find peace. And you don't find it within yourself unless, you grow into a very old and long life where that peace will come with age. And to really further that, you have to be so analytical with that aspect, just because if you don't really give yourself that point to see, you'll eventually, like what happened to Beau before the movie. But this also could have been, a dynamic because of the mother, but he turned back to his former shell and started to corrupt himself. And that kind of happens with people too. You have to find the correct dynamic and the correct healing methods. Otherwise, you'll kind of start doing the same thing Beau did, which is he's kind of trapped in this eternal repeated cycle, because it's kind of blatant that he's probably gone through this probably multitude of times, gone through trials, not in extreme cases like this, but the dynamic the mom has on him, how very judgmental she is. I can't see him not having moments where, and that's the one thing about the mom that really hurt me on an emotional level at the end of the movie, that the mom is she just expects so much more out of Beau, who is a character that just tries to do the best in this situation. But ultimately, a character like that, or a person like that, has to be pushed into the right directions. Otherwise, you create this negative feedback loop of choices that they won't choose because it'll hurt the people that tell them otherwise. And what really broke me was just because with my family, it has always felt like there was a moment of harsh judgment that you always have to pray and do as the family wants it done. Otherwise, you can see unforeseeable actions or disasters unfold. Even the slightest of conversations tips someone into madness, and that used to happen way more just because I couldn't choose realistically my words correctly at times, and that it would be portrayed in a negative sense in certain cases that would really damage a relationship I would have with my family. And that's sort of kind of the same dilemma with Beau, is that all the choices he's made to avoid disaster just creates disaster in the end, and that it creates this negative grudge that holds into the family, and that will be haunting him whenever he sees a family member or whatnot. This point is correlated to when Beau goes to the house of his mom and they talk. The mom reveals that she's not dead and that she was testing Beau because she wanted to see if he really did care, because she was cluing in that he was an individual that doesn't care at all. And that could be from his lack of change or like he became kind of the same type of individual without any growth, and the mom was really trying to make him see his wrongings, but all it was doing was making his situation even worse, because everything he ever said or thought was perceived and judged by his own mother. When we saw her bring out the therapy notes, and that really clued in that Beau, the dynamic with his mom is a space where he has no freedom, and that he'll always be into this darkened pit of thoughts just because his mom has always seen him that way. All you can really see in your life is the negativity. That's why, I always love tying it back to that scene, just because that scene is just so important every time, like remembering about it. The scene in the forest when Beau is watching the show and he puts in like how his story would look like if he was the main character, which is a very selfish kind of perception, but it's, to him, that's his freedom, that's his moment, that's where he can finally live, because all his moments in the movie, he's not living, he's not growing, he's not happy, it's all a downward spiral. And even in that moment of delusion, there is no happy end to him. There's no peace. He seemed to find it along his journey, but he would never recover if that peace was taken away from him again. And he always ties himself back to that he's never been able to recover. I think for this video I'm going to tie up some closing thoughts about the movie, or things that I'd like to talk about with regard of the movie, which are, with all these aspects of being in a family, you just have to be very concerned of your environment and how it can affect you, because it truly did affect Beau's character choices, especially towards the end as well, because we could see that guilt was not Beau's guilt, but the guilt perceived and judged by his mom. And that's kind of why, like, a movie like that Beau eventually is just perceived as a dead character, an unresolved character. And it really didn't give him any space to grow or anything. He was just alone with everything. And it really painted a really harsh scene towards the end when he was drowning. But ultimately, with that kind of scene, it really teaches lessons that we are all individuals that need company, need that growth or that experience out of each other. And that was the one thing Beau never really got throughout that whole film. I felt like he never really got to. He was very socially inept, and I felt like a character like that could have grown so much more if he had that. Just like from the scene of the forest, if he had that chance of redemption, if he repented and grew past what he felt were his sins, but sins betrayed from others' judgment. And that's really what the movie should have. And I felt like, even though it ended in a bad taste, I think it showed and taught a good lesson that we all need to move past people's judgment, because their judgment is not our guilt. And so that's the most important thing to take from this.